Hi, I'm Mary Beth O'Connor. I'm a board member for LifeRing. So I do a lot of speaking on behalf of LifeRing. I tell my story. I talk about LifeRing specifically, about multiple paths to recovery, on a lot of topics related to substance use disorder and recovery. Some of those presentations are on the LifeRing YouTube channel as well as the website. They're also available, more of them at my website, which is junkietojudge.com. I get most of these speaking engagements myself. I use my story, which is the name of my book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. I use that as a hook to get interviews, podcasts, radio. I do presentations at conferences, like at the Women for Sobriety conference. I'm doing a She Is Me conference. But some speaking engagements actually come into LifeRing directly, and we expect that might increase because there's going to be a national story about LifeRing coming out in October, we believe. And so we decided to create a speakers bureau to help train additional speakers in anticipation of that. But also, everyone is encouraged to speak on LifeRing's behalf at local Recovery Month events, for example, at their recovery house or other local facilities. Any opportunity to speak on LifeRing's behalf is encouraged. You don't have to use the presentation that I'm going to give. It is an example. I will also create a PowerPoint and an outline for you that you can modify as long as it's consistent with LifeRing principles and philosophies. But this is a way to help you see what one might look like. I created this presentation. I call it the nuts and bolts of LifeRing. The other aspect to that is that I am willing to work with members of the Speakers Bureau, but also any member of LifeRing who's going to speak, work with them individually. So you can practice with me, show me what do your presentation with me, and I will give you feedback about the substance and any other technical matters. To speak of which, technical issues. So today I actually don't have my best camera. So for this, it's at the top of the monitor, which causes me to look up a little. So I need to sit the right distance away. I also have a better microphone than that, because you don't want feedback if you're doing something via Zoom or other online technology. I have a light to my right because otherwise I get a shadow on my face. And I also definitely practice my presentation. I check to make sure that I'm centered. I have a screen behind me so you don't see my husband's office. I'm not actually on my good equipment because I'm in my husband's office today. But also think about your Wi-Fi. Does it drop? That would be problematic if you were speaking live. And also, or does it have connected to cable or something along those lines? So I would practice not only to get comfortable with your presentation, which is good because you don't want to be staring at it. And by the way, I do have an outline always in the center of my computer, but I don't need to use it that much because I'm familiar with the presentation. But it's there, and I try to double check it to make sure I didn't forget anything. And that's fine to glance down every now and again to make sure, or to do a quick check later. If it's an interview, of course, it's going to be back and forth. But if you're doing an actual LifeRing presentation, then that can be a good technique. So given all of that, I'm going to now give you the example presentation, which I call the nuts and bolts of LifeRing. So, hi, my name is Mary Beth O'Connor, and I'm a board member for LifeRing Secular Recovery. I'm going to tell you my story in brief and then give you a presentation that I call the nuts and bolts of LifeRing, and then I'm going to leave time for Q&A at the end. I say the short version of my story is child abuse led to childhood addiction. I started using alcohol, my first drug, when I was 12, and then moved on to pot, then pills, then acid, until I found my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine, when I was 16 years old. And I was shooting meth at 17 and in full bore addiction in high school. And that was a direct result of the verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse that I suffered at home. So for me, I then went to college. I went to Berkeley, and I kept my addiction under better, and I emphasize better control for the next 3.5 years. But I had a multi-assailant rape in college, and then I moved in with a violent boyfriend. And in January of my senior year, I picked up meth again. And I spent the next 10 years in a downhill slide. I say I worked my way down the corporate ladder because I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't get there. I couldn't stay all day. I couldn't concentrate on it when I was there. So every job was less responsibility and less money, and I held it for less time. But also my body was starting to have a lot of problems by 32. And I was really feeling emotionally completely debilitated and really, really hopeless. So I decided to go into rehab, and I went into a long-term women's program near my home. When I was there on the first day, as every day, they were doing a step study, one of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. And it so happened that on my first day there, they were doing step 3, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God of my understanding. And so, being the good student that I was, I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, what about me? I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a higher power. And I'm actually don't believe in turning my will and my life over." And I was told that day and repeatedly that the 12-step way was the only way. And that if I didn't comply with every aspect of that program, that I was going to fail. Well, that was problematic because I knew that way wouldn't work for me. I mean, not only the higher power factor, but I did not like the powerless idea and some of the other concepts. But, I'm paying these people for medical treatment, I thought, and they're only offering me an option that won't work. So I have to decide what to do. So I decided to just leave my ears and my mind open and to listen for those aspects of the program and of what they were teaching me in my recovery house, and apply the ones I thought would be useful to me and ignore everything else. And so, for example, in my recovery house, they taught us a little bit about the science of substance use disorder. They taught about things like how to recognize and handle triggers. They recommended that we develop a clean and sober network. All of those sounded like good ideas. I also read all of the AA Big Book, which is their text, and all of the NA text to try to find ideas that I thought would be helpful. Are there any core ideas in this 12-step program that I can actually use? So, for example, I found one day at a time to be helpful. I would have a very bad craving day, and I would say, I'm not deciding for tomorrow, but for today, I'm not going to use. I found some of the other concepts useful. The idea of powerless, I didn't agree that I was powerless over my recovery or really over my addiction, but I thought about it, and what I could agree was that I was powerless to moderate. Okay, Mary Beth cannot moderate. And I also, like, for example, went through step 3 and viewed it as a lesson in limited control, that I could and should take steps to reach my goals, but I couldn't always control the outcome. So even with all this sort of reconfiguring and rewriting of the one program I was told existed, I still really vacillated between some hope that I could recover and really fear when faced with the universal consensus that I could not if I did not comply completely with 12 steps. So when I got home, I actually went looking for options. Were there other programs that they just hadn't told me about? And this is 1994, so I went to the library because there's no Google. And I did find other programs. I found first Women for Sobriety, which was the first modern secular program. And in Women for Sobriety, they focus on empowering the women, recommending they release the past. There's a focus on positive reinforcement and group support. I also found Rational Recovery, which basically is now Smart Recovery. And at the time, they focused on relapse prevention, and that, in fact, your individual will could be the basis for your strong recovery. I also found SOS, Secular Organization for Sobriety. LifeRing broke off of SOS in 1995. And I will tell you LifeRing in much more detail, but some of the basic concepts are rational decision-making, mutual support, and each addict being responsible for her own recovery. So I did all the same way that I had started, right? I mixed, I listened to the ideas, I read all the materials, I went to all of the meetings, and I pulled the ideas that I thought would be useful for me. And I also went to therapy. I was in individual therapy, later group. My husband and I were in couples. I pulled ideas from there, from other readings, just from things I heard in meetings. I was always listening for any idea that I thought would be useful to me. I really spent a lot of time also. I had to deal with things like my post-traumatic stress disorder related anxiety that I didn't know that I had. I had a lot of trepidation professionally around my choppy resume and trying to get my feet back underneath me. There were a lot of challenges. I don't want to at all indicate that this was some straight uphill climb up the mountain for me. But by 2.5 or 3 years, I really felt like my brain had been rewired and not using was my new normal. And for me, the struggle was really over. So I did remedy my relationships. I was much more able to have a connected and bonded relationship with friends and family, and to be reliable, to be a good wife, a good sister, a good friend, but also to reach some professional goals. So I gradually worked my way a little bit, partly up the corporate ladder into a supervisory position. And at 6 years sober, I went to law school. I worked at a big law firm, and then did class action work for the government. And in 2014, when I had 20 years sober, I actually was appointed a federal administrative law judge. I took early retirement from that position in 2020, and now I speak and advocate on behalf of LifeRing and about multiple paths to recovery. And so that includes things like an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I beat addiction without God. I do podcasts, conferences, presentations like the one here today. And I also do have 28 years of continuous sobriety. So I did it basically the LifeRing way, building a personal recovery plan, which I'm going to talk about now. So LifeRing's philosophy is based on the 3 S's. So the first S is sobriety, of course. So LifeRing teaches that sobriety, to be successful, should be your number one priority. And by sobriety, LifeRing means no drugs, including alcohol, except as medically indicated and taken as prescribed. That includes medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorder. That is still consistent with sobriety in LifeRing terms. LifeRing talks about how abstinence is actually easier. It's easier to draw that hard line than to try to moderate. Most of us have failed in moderation by the time we get to the rooms. On the other hand, LifeRing does recognize that in the beginning, many people are not able to fully commit to abstinence for the rest of their life. Often people vacillate between yes and no, and maybe I was wrong when I thought I couldn't moderate. Maybe I can. That ambivalence is normal, and it's okay to talk in a LifeRing meeting about your struggles with abstinence in the earlier period. But in the long run, if someone decides abstinence isn't their goal, that moderation, or they're going to stop alcohol but continue to use cannabis, any of that, in the long run, we wouldn't be the right fit. But in the beginning, it's okay to talk about that ambivalence. LifeRing doesn't believe that substance use disorder is a character defect or that only certain personalities develop it. The science just doesn't support that. LifeRing also doesn't believe in the need to bottom out. Bottoming out as a philosophy is dangerous. People die that way. I had a low bottom, and LifeRing is perfectly able to help people with a low bottom, but it is better, and we encourage members to do earlier intervention. If they intervene early, they have lost fewer years, they have destroyed fewer aspects of their life where destruction is not as deep. Not to say there aren't areas they need to work on. I expect that there are, but longer use of the drug just increases the problems. LifeRing talks about sobriety in a metaphor. We talk about the sober self versus the addict self. So whenever I say we, I mean those of us with a substance use disorder, including me, We are very familiar with the addict side of ourselves, the side that's pushing us to keep using. But LifeRing believes that even in the deepest depths of addiction, that the people have a sober self, the part of them that wants to attain sobriety, or at least wants to be their true self, wants to have a happy and productive life. So LifeRing talks about how there's a fight going on between the sober self and the addict self, but that when we are faced with choices, large and small, we get to decide: am I going to choose the option that encourages chaos and misery, thereby encouraging the addict self? Because if you're miserable, you're more likely to keep using. Or am I going to make the choose the option that strengthens my sober self, the positive option, the option in the direction of sobriety? So if you make the positive choice, and especially you make it a few times, it becomes a habit, and then you make that positive choice in other areas, this builds on itself. And there's an increasing strengthening of the sober self. And over time, the sober self gets stronger and stronger, and the addict self gets weaker and weaker, and the sober self defeats the addict self. And that's a metaphor that can be useful to think about what long-term recovery looks like. The second S is secularity. So out of respect for all faiths and none, there is no religion in meetings. Now, many LifeRing members have personal, spiritual, or religious beliefs, and LifeRing has no opinion about that. But we know that it's not necessary for recovery. Now, if anyone has any concerns about that, there was actually a study done. It's called the PALS study by Sarah Zemore, Zemore, where she compared the effectiveness of, in other words, the percentage of people who stayed sober, of AA, LifeRing, Women for Sobriety, and SMART, and found basically they're all equally effective. What LifeRing believes is important is that people are told of their options so that they can find a program that's the right fit for them and thereby increase their chance of success. And then the third S is self-empowerment. LifeRing believes that my success is based on my motivation and my efforts. I am not powerless, but in fact need to fight for my sobriety. And this is also related to the personal recovery plan that I mentioned, which is what I did, developed a plan that worked for me. LifeRing believes that the person with a substance use disorder, even in the earliest recovery, does know what's best for her. It doesn't mean she will make perfect choices no matter what program she picks. That's unlikely. But that I know how to guide myself forward ultimately. And the other side of a personal recovery plan is that everyone is different. People walk in the rooms in different places. So, for example, one person may have destroyed themselves professionally, but still have relationships. And for someone else, it could be the opposite. Some people are like me. They have trauma histories or mental health challenges that need to be addressed. People have different personalities, different learning styles, different philosophical beliefs. The other aspect of a personal recovery plan is that we can't fix everything in day one. So even if Bob and I had the same list of things that we needed to work on, we may have different priorities based on our current circumstances or our preferences. So that my plan on day one and Bob's plan on day one wouldn't be the same plan, even if in the long run it would be similar. Now, personal recovery plan doesn't mean that members have to do it alone. LifeRing encourages our members to think, to listen, to read, to attend. All of these are sources of ideas and information to help build a strong personal recovery plan. There are a lot of benefits to a personal recovery plan, and one of them is self-knowledge. So basically, the member is doing an analysis. Where am I? Where do I want to go? How do I think I'm going to get there? And that self-analysis can create a strong sense of ownership to the plan. The member's not being told what to do. She's done the analysis. She's made the decision about what her plan is going to look like. And that can increase resilience. So if you are pushed off track or at risk of being pushed off track, that ownership, that self-knowledge can help you get back on track quicker or stay on track. And then the other side of it is really about efficacy, about self-empowerment success. So by doing the analysis and making these decisions and carrying them out, what I taught myself was that I am a capable and competent woman who can make those choices in life and can handle all of the challenges. Those skills applied to how I had to approach my mental health side, my trauma history, how I had to approach my career decisions, everything. Those skills apply outside of just recovery. And then the other side of it is, again, it's not about doing it alone. So self-empowerment includes asking for help when needed. So that means whether it's professional help or help from friends or family or from peers in recovery. And the other side of it is that the plan needs to be adjusted in time. So, for example, the plan I have on day one and the plan I have at 3 months or 6 months is probably not going to be the same plan. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, hopefully I've achieved some of my initial goals. So now I can either set a new goal in that domain, that area of life, LifeRing calls it a domain, or I can start attacking a different area. Another possibility is that sometimes when we start to carry out a goal or, carry out the steps to lead to a goal, we realize that that's actually not a good goal for us, or it's not as high a priority as we thought it was. So we put it aside. Another possibility is that despite our best efforts, when we did the analysis, we actually hadn't accounted for something. And so we need to do the analysis again, factoring in the new idea that we had overlooked the first time. And then another possibility is that we had a good plan and we just didn't carry it out. Okay. So then you have to analyze, why am I not carrying out my own plan? What is interfering with me doing that? So many LifeRing members attend just LifeRing, but many members also attend other programs as well, whether that's 12 Steps or Women for Sobriety or SMART, any of them. LifeRing 100% supports members of doing that. If a member believes that attending LifeRing and another program is going to help them build the best recovery plan, give them the most solid foundation for their recovery, LifeRing supports that 100%. Members don't have to hide that they're also doing these other programs. LifeRing meetings, the focus is really empowering that sober self that I talked about. All drugs are together, including alcohol, which is supported by the science. But in a LifeRing meeting, there's not the drug history focus that there is in some other programs. So our meeting format is called How Was Your Week? So how was the last week and what's coming up in the next week related to your recovery? So for last week, how did it go? Did you succeed at carrying out the recovery plan you had set for the week? Did you have unexpected challenges arise and you either handled them well and you want to share that positive experience with the group, or you didn't handle them as well as you wanted to and you want to talk that out? But that's also, how is next week? What's coming up? So, for example, pretty much every LifeRing member or everyone in recovery at some point is going to go to their first work event where alcohol is being served. And so a member might want to just say out loud, next week, I'm going to this event for work, there's going to be alcohol. Or the member might want to say out loud to the group, and here's my plan. Maybe just to hear it, but also perhaps to hold herself accountable. And she can come back next week and tell the group how she did with that plan. Another possibility is that she wants to hear from the group. So there's crosstalk. Members talk directly to each other. Crosstalk has to be positive or neutral, and there is a convener there to make sure of that and to make sure it stays on track. But it can be valuable to say to the group, who else has faced this situation? How did you handle it? What strategies did you use? Now, again, it's a personal recovery plan. What worked for Bob may not work for me. It's my job to listen, to either accept the suggestions or reject them or modify them based on what I think will work for me, because that's all they are, suggestions. But it can still be of great value to get input from the group in that way. Another aspect is that LifeRing meetings are intended to be smaller than some other programs so that everyone has an opportunity to share. So, for example, the Zoom meetings, if we have a Zoom meeting that tends to get too large regularly, we try to have a co-convener to break that meeting in two so that there's a meeting of an appropriate size. Members can pass, but if everyone wanted to speak, we want there to be enough time for that. LifeRing meetings tend to be less regimented than some other programs. So, for example, LifeRing offers a variety of opening and closing statements to the conveners, but they don't have to use them or they can modify them as long as it's consistent with LifeRing philosophy. LifeRing does not require that members self-identify as an addict, that they believe they have a disease or a disorder or a habit, or that they track time. Many members do this because they find value in it, but it's not mandatory. Each member decides for herself as to all of those matters. LifeRing has a website, of course, lifering.org, and there's a lot of materials there. Now, as to meetings, prior to COVID, LifeRing had about 200 meetings around the US, as well as meetings in other countries like Canada and Ireland. But with COVID, we basically went online, and we had been online pre-COVID. We had a few meetings already online, but with COVID, we were pretty much exclusively online. Some meetings now have gone back to face-to-face, but a lot of them still are online. And even if we had 200 meetings face-to-face, we would continue to have a significant number of online meetings now for a number of reasons. One is a lot of our members now like it, now that they've been exposed to it. It also lets a member in rural Montana have an opportunity to participate in LifeRing when there might not be a local meeting there. And it has allowed us to have what we call specialty meetings because we're pulling from the whole country. So, for example, we have women's meetings, we have LGBTQIA plus meetings, we have dual diagnosis meetings, veterans meetings, liver spot meeting for members with chronic health conditions, and we have workbook meetings. So those will continue even if we get back face-to-face. And LifeRing does have a number of books. They're available on Amazon. Our basic text is called Empower Your Sober Self, and that goes into much more detail than I could hear today about the 3 S's, the personal recovery plan, the sober self versus the addict self, all of that. We also have that workbook that I mentioned. It's called Recovery by Choice. The workbook is broken into 9 domains, which is sort of areas of life. So domains include things like my activities, my drug and alcohol exposure currently, feelings, preventing relapse. The workbook isn't in any particular order, except that the relapse section and the intermittent review of your plan, those are at the end. And also members not only don't have to do it from front to back, because it's generally not in any order, but they don't have to do sections if they don't apply. And now this is LifeRing, right? So the workbook is not giving answers. It's a self-analysis tool. It's a tool to build a personal recovery plan. It has ideas and suggestions and worksheets for the member to think it through, do the analysis, and decide what their plan is going to be. There's also a book called Humanly Possible, and that book is LifeRing members with long-term sobriety who have done it the secular way. And because it's LifeRing, they've done all kinds of ways, so it can be a good source of seeing the different approaches that different people have taken. We have a YouTube channel, and there are a number of presentations there you might want to review. Those are now also on the website. And you can contact me if you have any questions afterward, Mary Beth. And it is, in real life, it's 2 words, but in my email, it's 1 word, marybeth@lifering.org. And if you forget, I'm a board member, and you can get my email off of the board member part of the website. Okay, LifeRing people listening to my presentation, that is the gist of what I do for the presentation. And and then I would ask if there were questions. I would ask, are there any questions? And that is another thing when you're doing your prep for your presentation, you need to know how long you're going to have to speak and whether or not there'll be Q&A, because you need to time your presentation to fit with the format that you're given. Sometimes it'll be longer than other times, shorter than other times. Sometimes there will be a Q&A, usually, but not always. All right, so I'm going to now go through some common questions that I get, and I'm going to give you the answers that I have developed. So a very common question, the most common question is, does LifeRing have sponsors? My answer to that is no. First of all, it's a personal recovery plan. So each member decides what's going to work for them. Having someone else tell them what they must do or how they must approach it is really inconsistent with that. The other aspect of sponsorship is that the sponsors job is to help the member work the steps, right? That's the purpose. So to meet that same need, LifeRing has the workbook available to do the analysis to create the personal recovery plan. And it also has the workbook meetings if people want even more structure. There's a convener leading a group through the workbook. Another role of sponsor is support or mentoring. Well, crosstalk is a way to get support and mentoring. You're asking the group for ideas and suggestions, or just talking about different topics that have arisen, like, feeling ambivalent about your recovery. That could be a discussion. Another aspect is that many of the LifeRing meetings, especially in person, they had a phone number list. So the regular members who were willing to give out their number or email to help newcomers, there was a list, and that would be handed out when new people attended the meeting. But even on Zoom, people do send each other personal messages and say, hey, I've been listening to your shares and I'd really like to have a private conversation. And that happens. People, if they're in the local area, either at a face-to-face meeting or they met through an online meeting, they can go out to coffee. People sometimes go to each other's houses, they go bowling, whatever. Personal relationships do get developed. Now, people that are listening in LifeRing, I don't say this unless I'm pushed. If somebody said, well, what do you think are the negatives? The only thing I would say, and I don't say it unless specifically asked, is, and I would always preface it with, 12 steps is a good fit for many people. And if we encourage people to investigate that as an option, and if it's a good fit and they find success in their sobriety, we are very happy for them. Sometimes, though, the sponsor relationship can overreach and get into areas of life other than recovery. Sometimes there's a little bit of, do what I say. You have to toe the line attitude, which a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And often there's just the sponsor's offering what worked for her, and that may not be a good fit for you. So that's what I would say to that. All right, another question that I get: how is LifeRing different from the 12 steps? So my response to that is, well, there is no higher power required. People can have a personal belief in a higher power or a God or any spiritual religious belief personally, and then many LifeRing members do, but we don't require a higher power for recovery. We know it's not necessary. Another distinction is that 12 steps is around this idea of powerless, whereas LifeRing is around the idea of self-empowerment. Crosstalk is another distinction. In 12-step meetings, there is no crosstalk. In LifeRing meetings, there is. Another big important distinction is that in LifeRing meetings, there are no drug-a-logs, right? There's no speaker who's going to spend 15, 20, 30 minutes of the meeting telling their personal story, their personal drug history, and something about how they recovered. We spend that time talking to making sure that each member has an opportunity to talk. And then meeting size, we try to be smaller. Some 12-step meetings can get really large. Sometimes I can ask this question. 12-step says you can take what you need and leave the rest. Why isn't that sufficient? And my response to that is, that's true. That is in the literature, and sometimes people will tell you that in a meeting. However, I don't believe that they mean you can reject having a higher power or the idea of being powerless or working the steps or having a sponsor. Those are core 12-step beliefs that I don't believe they intend you to reject. And the other reality is, if you're rejecting the fundamental concepts of 12 steps, then almost certainly another program is going to be a better fit. So just do the research, look at the other programs, and see if one of the others seems to be philosophically closer to where you are. Another question I get is LifeRing against the 12 steps? It sounds like you're being negative. And again, I would say, no, absolutely not. If it's a good fit for the individual, LifeRing's happy when anyone finds recovery. Our only concern is when people are told that 12 steps is the only way or a better way, because neither of those statements is true. Another question I get is, I'm not decided about abstinence. And so I would go through what I talked about earlier about, we understand there's some ambivalence in the beginning. It's okay to talk through that ambivalence, but in the long run, we're abstinence. And another question I get is LifeRing in support of harm reduction? And my answer is, we don't have an official LifeRing policy about that, but it is not uncommon in our members to see a type of harm reduction happening as they try to reach their abstinence goal, if they in fact have that abstinence goal. So members will often use less or get rid of their worst drug, and then later get rid of the drug they view as causing less problems. So some members do effectively practice harm reduction. So those are my answers. And that's all I have for you today. So as a reminder, you can reach out to me, marybeth@lifering.org. I'm happy to work with you individually, happy to answer any questions. And if you want to be on the Speakers Bureau, send me an email. Thanks.